History often loves to give us simple answers. Ask anyone who changed Europe more, and many will instinctively say Adolf Hitler. After all, his war engulfed the entire world. His regime committed horrors that still haunt our collective memory, and his defeat reshaped global politics for generations. But is it really that simple? Because long before Hitler ever rose to power, Napoleon Bonaparte had already turned Europe upside down. He destroyed old empires, spread revolutionary ideals, and left behind institutions that still exist today. So the question is not just who changed Europe more, but how do we measure change? Is it through destruction or through transformation? Through terror or through legacy? Tonight, let's dive into the uncomfortable debate. Who was the true architect of Europe's destiny, Napoleon or Hitler? Let's start with Napoleon. Born in Corsica, an outsider to the French elite, he rose during the chaos of the French Revolution. This alone was extraordinary. He was not a king, not a noble, but a soldier who climbed through sheer talent and ambition. Napoleon seized power in 1799, crowning himself emperor in 1804, as if to say, "I am greater than kings, I am the maker of empires." His genius on the battlefield is still legendary. At Austerlitz, he crushed both Austria and Russia in a single day. At Jena, he humiliated Prussia. He marched armies faster, struck harder, and outthought opponents who relied on outdated traditions. But his change wasn't just military. Everywhere his armies went, they carried with them the Napoleonic code laws that replaced feudal privilege with meritocracy, equality before the law, and secular governance. Even today, many European legal systems trace their roots back to Napoleon's reforms. Ask yourself, is this not a deeper form of change than conquest? Because conquest fades, but laws remain. Now, let's look at Hitler. His rise was equally born of chaos Germany after World War I, humiliated, impoverished, desperate for salvation. Hitler offered not progress, but revenge. His ideology wasn't about reforming society for the future, but restoring a mythical past of racial purity. While Napoleon marched under the banner of revolutionary ideals, Hitler marched under the banner of hate. Yet his impact cannot be denied. In less than 12 years, Hitler's regime dragged Europe into the deadliest war in history. Cities lay in ruins, tens of millions were dead, and the map of Europe was redrawn. Hitler did not give Europe new institutions. He left scars. NATO, the European Union, even the division of East and West, these were all born in reaction to Hitler's war. So ask yourself, does the power to destroy count as change, or is true change found in what survives? Here's where it gets interesting. Napoleon, for all his ambition, ultimately lost. Defeated at Waterloo in 1815, exiled to a lonely island, his empire crumbled. But his ideas did not. Nationalism, legal equality, secular governance, these ideas outlived him. Hitler, too, lost. Dead in a bunker, his empire annihilated, his ideology discredited. Yet his shadow also lingered. The Holocaust reshaped moral consciousness. The war crimes trials created a new standard of justice. The United Nations was formed in direct response to the destruction he caused. So here we are, left with two fallen men, two destroyed empires, and two legacies that shaped Europe in completely different ways. Which one changed Europe more, the emperor who built systems, or the dictator who forced the world to build new ones against him? Let's go deeper into the type of change each man represented. Napoleon's change was structural. He built an empire that modernized law, administration, and education. Even his enemies absorbed his reforms. Prussia, after its defeat, reformed its army and bureaucracy in imitation of Napoleon's efficiency. Italy, fragmented for centuries, began to dream of unity under Napoleonic rule. Germany itself would later unify with echoes of what Napoleon had sparked. This is how powerful his influence was. His ideas spread even through defeat. Hitler's change, by contrast, was reactive. He forced Europe to define itself not by what it wanted to be, but by what it never wanted to come again. His destruction created a shared determination. Never again dictatorship of that kind, never again genocide, never again total war on that scale. One man spread ideals, the other spread caution. Both reshaped Europe, but in opposite directions. Now consider the human element. Napoleon inspired loyalty and admiration. Soldiers followed him because they believed he would lead them to glory, and many adored him long after his fall. Even in exile, he dictated his memoirs as if to remind the world that he had once been larger than life. Hitler inspired fanaticism, yes, but also fear. His power depended not on love, but on terror. His followers were loyal so long as he appeared invincible, but once defeat loomed, betrayal and collapse followed. Napoleon built devotion. Hitler built a cult. Which one is more dangerous to a society? The leader who inspires too much admiration, or the leader who inspires obedience through fear? The irony is that both men wanted to reshape Europe in their image. Napoleon saw himself as the heir to Rome, creating a continental empire united under his reforms. Hitler saw himself as the destroyer of the Versailles Order, carving out a new Europe based on racial domination. But while Napoleon's vision, flawed as it was, offered a blueprint of governance, Hitler's vision offered only ruin. Napoleon's Europe could be imagined, debated, copied. Hitler's Europe collapsed the moment his armies did. And yet, one could argue that Hitler's destruction was so immense that it forced Europe into a unity Napoleon could never achieve. The European Union was not born from Napoleon's empire. It was born from the rubble of Hitler's. So, in a twisted way, both men achieved their goals. Napoleon through direct reform, Hitler through indirect catastrophe. Here's the question you need to ask yourself. When we measure impact, do we value what a man creates, or what a man forces others to create in response? Is Hitler greater in his legacy because Europe had to rebuild itself against him? Or is Napoleon greater because his ideas still function inside our daily lives? Think about your own society today. Do you live under a legal system influenced by Napoleon? Probably yes. Do you live under freedoms, human rights, and international institutions created as a reaction to Hitler? Also yes. Which influence weighs heavier, the laws you obey every day, or the freedoms you defend because of the memory of a past you refuse to repeat? This is why the debate matters. Because both men prove that history is not shaped only by heroes, but also by villains. Some change the world by building, others by destroying. And sometimes, destruction leaves a mark deeper than creation. So when we ask, who truly changed Europe forever? We are not just comparing Napoleon and Hitler. We are comparing two visions of power itself. One that builds systems, and one that breaks them. To truly weigh Napoleon against Hitler, we must look at how each of them treated the idea of Europe itself. For Napoleon, Europe was a chessboard on which he could arrange kings, redraw borders, and spread his reforms. He placed his brothers on thrones in Spain, Naples, Holland, and Westphalia. He married into dynasties to strengthen his legitimacy. He even sought to unify the continent under a single economic system through the Continental Blockade, aimed at breaking Britain's dominance. Though many of these moves failed in the long term, the vision behind them was clear: a Europe restructured by design. For Hitler, Europe was never a chessboard to govern, but a battlefield to conquer. He had no interest in integrating nations into a common framework. His plan was colonization, subjugation, and extermination. Where Napoleon sought to shape Europe, Hitler sought to dominate it. So again, we return to the question: which vision had a deeper impact, the builder or the destroyer? Let us not romanticize Napoleon too much. His campaigns left devastation across Europe. Spain was ravaged in a brutal guerrilla war. Russia burned rather than submit to him. Millions of lives were lost in his wars. Yet, there is a fundamental difference in perception. Even his enemies admitted Napoleon carried with him the ideals of the French Revolution. Feudal systems trembled wherever he marched. Guilds, noble privileges, church dominance, all of them weakened under his reign. When Napoleon fell, many European monarchies restored themselves, but the clock could never fully be turned back. Ideas, once unleashed, are harder to kill than armies. Can we say the same for Hitler? Did his ideology leave behind ideas worth preserving? Or was it universally discredited, forced into the shadows of shame? This leads us to another important lens. How did ordinary people experience each regime? In Napoleonic France, young men were conscripted into endless wars. Families lived under censorship, and opponents were silenced. But many also experienced opportunities unthinkable under the old regime. A soldier could rise by merit rather than birth. A lawyer could practice under a standardized code. The middle classes thrived under a system that valued efficiency and education. For Hitler's Germany, ordinary people initially experienced economic revival, national pride, and order after chaos. But that revival was built on lies on rearmament, propaganda, and scapegoating minorities. The cost was hidden at first, but when it came with catastrophic collapse. Napoleon gave society a ladder, even if it stood on a battlefield. Hitler gave society a bomb, ticking from the moment he came to power. Which gift was worse, the dangerous ladder or the inevitable bomb? Another way to frame this is through legacy of memory. Napoleon is remembered as both a hero and a tyrant. In France, his tomb at Les Invalides is still a site of national pride. In Europe, his name is both admired and cursed. He is debated, studied, even romanticized. Hitler, in contrast, has no such duality. He is remembered as a monster, his ideology as a warning, his name as a curse. You cannot romanticize Hitler without exposing yourself to disgust. And this raises an uncomfortable question. Does the ability to still inspire admiration, even centuries later, make Napoleon more influential? Or does universal hatred make Hitler's memory more powerful? Which is the stronger legacy love and debate, or hatred and rejection? Consider the institutions that survived. Napoleon's Napoleonic Code is still the backbone of many modern legal systems in Europe, Latin America, and beyond. His centralized administration inspired models of governance still used today. His reforms in education created a template for state-run schools. Hitler, by contrast, left no institutions worth keeping. His laws were annulled, his structures dismantled, his symbols banned. His institutions were remembered only as crimes. So again, we see the paradox. Napoleon changed Europe by adding to it. Hitler changed Europe by forcing subtraction. Napoleon's legacy was continuity. Hitler's was rupture. Which type of change reshapes a continent more permanently? Let's also examine the global impact. Napoleon's wars spread far beyond France, influencing Latin America's revolutions. His confrontation with Britain pushed the British Empire toward global dominance, laying groundwork for the 19th century world order. Hitler's war likewise extended far beyond Germany. It ended European dominance globally. After 1945, the United States and the Soviet Union emerged as superpowers, while old European empires collapsed. Hitler's actions didn't just change Europe, they ended Europe's supremacy over the world. In that sense, Hitler's change was larger in scale, even if rooted in destruction. So which matters more, Napoleon shaping Europe within, or Hitler reshaping Europe's place in the world? There is also the matter of myth. Napoleon's myth was crafted even during his life. He had painters depict him as a Roman emperor. Writers describe him as a man of destiny. He carefully controlled how he was remembered. Even in defeat, he narrated his exile as a tragedy of greatness betrayed. Hitler also built a myth while in power, the myth of the 1,000-year Reich, of Germany as destiny, of himself as the savior. But unlike Napoleon, Hitler's myth shattered the moment he died. No glory, no tragic hero, just ruin and shame. This contrast reveals something essential. Napoleon's myth survived because his story contained aspirations law, order, merit, unity. Hitler's myth collapsed because his story contained only hate. Which myth is more powerful, the one that inspires or the one that warns? Now we must ask the most provocative question. If both men never existed, Which absence would have changed history more? Without Napoleon, perhaps the ideals of the French Revolution would have spread more slowly. Perhaps Germany and Italy would have unified later. Perhaps Europe's modernization would have been delayed. Without Hitler, perhaps the Holocaust would never have occurred. World War II might not have erupted in the same way. The Cold War would never have divided the world. Which absence reshapes our present more, the absence of a builder or the absence of a destroyer? This is why the debate over Hitler versus Napoleon is not just about history. It is about the very definition of influence. Do we measure it by positive contributions that last, or by catastrophic events that force the world to react? Napoleon's hand is still present in the institutions we use daily. Hitler's hand is present in the boundaries we refuse to cross, the warnings we live with. Both haunt Europe, one through systems, the other through scars. So, who truly changed Europe forever, Napoleon or Hitler? To answer, we need to zoom out and think about the psychology of change itself. Napoleon's change was evolutionary, even when carried by war. He wanted to mold Europe into something modern, centralized, rational. His wars were bloody, but his blueprint contained systems that could outlast him. Hitler's change was catastrophic. He tore Europe apart with an intensity so violent that it forced an entirely new order to emerge from the ashes. Europe after Napoleon looked different because of what he built. Europe after Hitler looked different because of what he destroyed. Which of these is the deeper transformation? Let's weigh the human element again. Napoleon was a man who believed in talent over birth. He opened doors for ordinary men to rise, creating an army of believers who followed him not just because he commanded them, but because they saw him as one of their own. His charisma, his aura of destiny, made him a symbol of opportunity. Hitler, in contrast, thrived not on opportunity, but on resentment. He gave his followers not hope, but enemies to hate. He didn't raise people up. He pulled them into the abyss of ideology. Both methods worked. Both mobilized millions, but their legacies diverged. Napoleon gave Europe reforms it could refine. Hitler gave Europe a trauma it could not ignore. So which man was more influential, the one who elevated ambition, or the one who corrupted fear? There's also the matter of time. Napoleon ruled for about 15 years, Hitler for barely 12. Yet their impacts extended centuries beyond. Napoleon's reforms shaped 19th century Europe, even after his empire collapsed. Hitler's destruction shaped the entire 20th century, defining the Cold War, the European Union, the decline of empires, and even modern concepts of human rights. Napoleon's influence was gradual, integrated, subtle. Hitler's was explosive, overwhelming, undeniable. It is like comparing an architect who slowly builds a city with one who drops a bomb on it. Which left a stronger imprint, the careful design or the crater? Now think of how Europe remembers them. Napoleon's story is still debated in classrooms, still commemorated in monuments, still romanticized in novels. His hat, his stance with one hand in his coat, his image as the conqueror, they remain cultural icons. Hitler, by contrast, is remembered not in monuments, but in warnings. His name is invoked as the universal symbol of evil, the yardstick against which all dictators are measured. To call someone a Hitler is to instantly condemn them. That power of memory is itself a form of legacy. So we ask, which legacy has more weight, the one that inspires admiration and controversy, or the one that defines the limits of morality? Napoleon's Europe was one of ideas spreading outward: nationalism, secular governance, meritocracy. Hitler's Europe was one of limits forced inward. Never again dictatorship of that kind. Never again extermination. Never again war on that scale. One left us tools. The other left us boundaries. Perhaps that is the truest measure of their difference. Napoleon helped create the possibilities of modern Europe. Hitler forced Europe to recognize the dangers that could destroy it. Without Napoleon, Europe might be less modern. Without Hitler, Europe might be less cautious. Which of these lessons matters more? But here's the real provocation. Maybe it is wrong to separate them entirely. Napoleon showed the world the power of ambition unchecked. Hitler showed the world the destruction of ideology unchecked. Both are warnings, both are lessons. Europe today stands not just on the ruins of Hitler or the reforms of Napoleon, but on the combined weight of their legacies. We cannot live under Napoleon's code without remembering Hitler's crimes. We cannot enjoy stability without remembering chaos. Together, they defined the bookends of European transformation, the architect who built and the dictator who destroyed. And so the debate rages on. Was it Napoleon who reshaped laws, education, and governance, leaving permanent marks on daily life? Or was it Hitler, whose catastrophic war forced Europe to redefine itself, ending centuries of empire and birthing a new global order? The truth is, both men changed Europe forever, but in opposite ways. Napoleon shaped Europe's bones. Hitler scarred its soul. Which matters more to you, the structure you live in, or the trauma you carry? This is why we cannot answer the question with certainty. It is why historians argue, why nations remember differently, why audiences like you are drawn to this clash. Because asking, who changed Europe more, is not just about the past, it is about how we understand power today. Do we fear the leader who builds too much, or the leader who destroys too much? Do we celebrate ambition, or do we guard against ideology? And most importantly, do we realize that Europe and the world is still living with the shadows of both? So I leave you with this challenge. When you look at the map of Europe today, when you think about the rights you have, the institutions you rely on, the freedoms you defend, are you living more in Napoleon's Europe or in Hitler's? The answer is not simple, and maybe that's the point. History doesn't give us easy answers. It gives us questions that force us to confront ourselves. And this is the question that will never go away. Who truly changed Europe forever? Napoleon, the emperor of ambition, or Hitler, the dictator of destruction?